A unit is a group of models that activates together in the same general area. Units are comprised of troopers. Every member of a unit is considered to be a trooper. Most basic units, like these Stormblades, consist of a leader and some grunts. We see our leader here in the middle with his notably larger weapon. Leaders often have distinguishing characteristics like this to tell them apart from the grunts. Leaders play a part in a unit's formation, as we'll see later, and often have special rules of their own. This Stormblade leader, for instance, increases the damage of nearby members of his unit. Many units are able to purchase attachments. Let's look at some Stormblade attachments. On the right, we see our Standard Bearer. Standard Bearers allow a unit to reroll failed command checks. They also have a special rule that allows a nearby grunt to pick up their standard when the bearer dies, as we'll see later in the video. Standard Bearers are not grunts. In the center, we have our Officer. Officers are used to determine a unit's formation. They also usually bring their own special rules or orders to the unit. Many officers' special benefits are granted. Granted effects only apply to the unit while the officer is alive and go away when he dies. Other benefits are referred to as tactics. Tactic benefits remain with the unit even after the officer dies. Lastly, we have weapon attachments, like these Stormblade Gunners. Weapon attachments usually have their own unique weapons or special abilities, and allow you to spend points to bring additional firepower to your unit. Weapon attachments are not considered to be grunts. When units activate, we must resolve each member's movement before any member can act. We can choose to move them in any order we like. Once all of our Stormblades have finished moving toward the Gatorman, we can resolve their actions. Again, we can choose the order in which they act. They need not act in the same order they moved. If it were the Gatorman's activation, they could each take their movements and then each attack. Each Gatorman has 2 attacks. You may choose which Gatorman you would like to act first, but that Gatorman must finish all of his attacks before you move on to the next. Here's an example of an illegal activation. These 2 Gatormen on the edges would like to move and act first to clear a lane for that last Gatorman to attack Striker. But the Gatormen are all part of one unit, so they must complete all their moves first before attacking. So unfortunately, this won't work. Occasionally, an aspect of the battle can be so horrifying as to cause a unit to make a command check. To make this check, the player rolls 2d6 and compares the result to its unit's command stat. If the result is equal to or lower than the command stat, the unit passes. A unit usually uses the command stat of its unit commander, but can use the command stat of a nearby model with the commander advantage, if any member of the unit is in the nearby commander's command range. Note that all Warlocks and Warcasters have the commander advantage. A unit with a Standard Bearer in formation can re-roll each failed command check once. One of the most common ways to trigger a command check is to approach a terrifying entity, like these Skinwalkers. If a movement or effect results in at least one member of your unit being in a terrifying entity's melee range, or having a terrifying entity in his melee range, that entire unit must make a command check. This check is made after the movement or effect that brought the entity into range is resolved. If the unit's movement caused a check, resolve all the remaining moves of the unit before the command check. You only need to make one terror check once per turn per terrifying entity. If another model with terror charged our hapless Stormblades here, we'd need to make a second check, even if it were the same turn. Units of terror-causing models count as a single entity, so we don't need to make a check for each individual Skinwalker here. We don't need to make subsequent command checks on later turns for remaining in combat with a terrifying entity. We would only need to check again with these Skinwalkers if we somehow became disengaged and then re-engage them on a later turn. If a unit loses 50% of the troopers it started the turn with in that turn, it must make a command check for massive casualties. It only needs to make a massive casualties check once per turn, so this Stormblade unit would need to check now that it's down to 3 models. It wouldn't need to check again if 2 or more models were destroyed later in the turn. Massive casualty checks are separate from terror checks. The Stormblade unit would have had to make a command check after the Skinwalker's initial charge, and then a second one after the 3rd Stormblade were destroyed. The Standard Bearer would have allowed the unit to re-roll any failed checks. A unit that fails its command check flees. A fleeing model cannot make attacks, even free strikes, cannot take actions, cast spells, or advance outside of its normal movement, like the moves granted by Vengeance. During its activation, a fleeing model must run, though it can choose to run 0 inches. A fleeing model cannot advance toward an enemy model. If this Stormblade leader were fleeing, he could not run here because this advance would bring him closer to the Skinwalker. He could also not run up here, closer to the Bloodletters, even though the Bloodletters do not cause terror and didn't provoke the command check. He could scurry into the corner here, as this advance would bring him farther away from all enemy models. A fleeing model or unit can attempt to rally at the end of its activation. This model/unit makes a command check. If it passes, it is no longer fleeing. If it fails the check, it is still considered to be fleeing. So, when a unit flees, it becomes much less effective. It'll essentially lose at least one turn, a turn when it can only run and thus not take any actions. Fleeing units can't make free strikes, or score or contest scenario, flags, or zones. Fleeing models are not forced to move. They can always choose to run 0 inches. Models that are fearless, undead, or a construct or a warbeast always pass command checks and never flee. Troopers that are out of formation cannot attempt to rally. Units are much more effective when they stay in formation. Formation is measured from the unit commander. All units have a unit commander. In a basic unit like this one, with the leader and grunts, the leader is the unit commander. Every trooper in the unit commander's command range is in formation, where command range is the unit commander's command stat in inches. If we add an officer to the unit, the officer becomes the unit commander. Now formation is measured from the officer and uses the officer's command stat. If the officer is destroyed, the leader becomes the unit commander, and a unit's formation is measured using the leader's command from that leader's current location. When a trooper is outside of its unit commander's command range, he is out of formation. There are many terrible consequences to being out of formation. An out of formation trooper cannot make attacks, even free strikes. He cannot make actions, cast spells, or advance outside of his normal movement, like with vengeance moves or the movement granted by Striker 2's feat. If a trooper starts his activation out of formation, he must use his normal movement to make it full advance toward, or run directly toward, his unit commander. An advance toward the unit commander has some freedom. You must simply move such that you are getting closer throughout the move. If an out of formation trooper runs, he must move directly toward his unit commander, which requires him to move along a line drawn between the center of their two bases. An out of formation trooper that makes a full advance must forfeit his action, so even if he moves back into formation, he won't be able to act. An out of formation trooper suffers -2 to his individual command stat. This is important because if he is still out of formation when his unit's activation ends, that individual model must make a command check using his individual adjusted command stat. If he fails, he flees. This failure does not cause his entire unit to flee. This puts the fleeing model in a tough spot because fleeing forces him to run, and being out of formation while running forces him to run directly toward his unit commander. It's often best to move the unit commander toward a fleeing out of formation model to set up a rally attempt, as the out of formation trooper's movement is so limited. Fearless models automatically pass the command check for ending their activation out of formation, but still suffer the other penalties for being out of formation, like being unable to attack. Orders can give units special abilities and allow them to maneuver differently. Orders are given by the unit commander, usually the leader or officer, at the beginning of the unit's activation. A unit can only issue one order per activation, and out-of-formation models in a unit do not benefit from orders. Orders that are listed in the special rules of a unit's officer can only be issued by that officer, and are no longer available if the officer dies. Officers can issue an order listed under the unit's leader or grunt special rules. A unit requires an order to run or charge. Each trooper in a unit under a charge order may choose whether he runs or charges, and may move in any order. Most of these zombie fish have charge lanes to the Stormblade. But the three in the back do not, so they choose to run. Since all troopers under a charge order must run or charge, none of them can make a full advance. Neither can they make range attacks, special actions like healing or repairing, or non-melee special attacks, as charging models are forced to spend their actions making melee attacks. This Gatorman Bokor here has a cool voodoo spell that could freeze Striker in place, but he couldn't use it in this activation because his unit charged. He'll have to settle for good old-fashioned alligator bites and tail slaps. Remember that a unit can only benefit from one order per activation, so if a unit has a special order on its card, like Shield Wall, it cannot use that while also receiving a charge order. When the leader of a unit is destroyed, a grunt in the unit must be promoted to the new leader. You may choose any grunt in the unit, but cannot choose a trooper that is not a grunt, like a standard bearer or weapon attachment. Any effects that were present on the destroyed leader expire. Any effects present on the grunt that is to be promoted are applied to the leader model that is replacing it. The new leader has the same amount of remaining health boxes as the grunt you promoted. The newly promoted grunt now leader has all the leader's special abilities and weapons, so this new Stormblade leader can increase the damage of nearby troopers. If the destroyed leader were the unit commander, the newly promoted leader becomes the unit commander immediately, and unit formation is determined from the new leader's location. This can lead to troopers being out of formation, like the Stormblade on the far right here. That newly promoted leader was in a bad position. We'd be better off promoting a more central grunt, like this one at the top of the screen. Now all of our troopers are in formation. Let's add an officer to the unit. The officer becomes our unit commander, and unit formation is measured from him now. If our leader dies, we still must promote a grunt to be the new leader, even though it won't affect how we measure unit formation. If our officer were to die, we would not promote a grunt to be the new officer. The officer is gone. Our leader would immediately become the unit commander, and unit formation would be measured from him. This could lead to out-of-formation models. Now we'll toss in a standard bearer. Standard bearers have a rule very similar to promotion. If a standard bearer dies, a grunt in that unit within 1 inch of the destroyed standard bearer can pick up the standard. The grunt's model is replaced with the standard bearer model, and any effects on the original standard bearer expire, and the new standard inherits any effects from the grunt, as well as his remaining health boxes. Only a grunt can pick up the standard, not an officer, leader, or weapon attachment. This promotion occurs after the standard is destroyed, so simultaneous effects, like AoE attacks, that destroy both the standard and the nearby grunt at the same time, won't allow the standard to pass to that grunt. Some weapon attachments have a similar ability called Take Up. A grunt within 1 inch of a destroyed model with Take Up can pick up his weapon. Unlike with a standard, the grunt is removed from play, and the would have been destroyed weapon attachment stays where he is and inherits the grunt's effects and boxes. Artillery models, not shown here, have their own version of promotion. The leader of a light artillery unit will have the artillery weapon on his card. If the leader dies, a grunt in the unit is promoted and thus gains that weapon. Unlike normal units, a grunt in the artillery unit must be within 1 inch of the leader to be promoted, otherwise the leader and his weapon are lost. This prevents the silly practice of bouncing a large artillery weapon 7 inches down the field through promotion. It's possible for a leader to be destroyed or removed from play while there are no valid grunts to promote. If there's no officer in the unit, there won't be an apparent unit commander. Since all units must have a unit commander from which to measure unit formation, you must choose another trooper to take over as unit commander. That trooper's position and special rules are unchanged, but formation will then be measured from that model. Here I could choose any of the 3 remaining troopers, so I'll take the standard, because he's in a more central position. Occasionally, a unit, like these boom howlers, will start the game with an officer and grunts, but no leader. If Gregor Boomhowler were to be destroyed, we would not promote a grunt as officers do not get promoted. Since this would leave our unit with no unit commander, we would need to immediately pick a grunt to be our new unit commander and measure formation from him. I'll choose the green-haired guy in the middle, he seems like an up-and-comer. Like so many aspects of Warmachine, the unit rules have many complicated nuances. Always try to keep your units in formation. Put thought into your leader and grunt's positioning. Will a future promotion cause models to be out of formation? If your officer were to be destroyed, will your leader have the rest of the unit in his command range? Watch your opponent's units closely. Did he get sloppy and leave one straggler out of range? Will destroying his leader or officer force him to assign a new unit commander in a less than ideal position? Then you can let him know the terrible consequences of being out of formation. Ask yourselves these questions in games and improve your play. Thank you for watching. Check out Gearwig.com for frequent updates and more videos like this one. And send comments and suggestions to boss@gearwig.com.